Good morning. It is so wonderful to see so many smiling faces. There's Taylor back there too and his dad. So it's wonderful to see everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Symposium for the Fort Wallace Museum, Communication Along the Smoky Hill Trail. We've got very, very distinguished guests to address us today, and I'm excited about what we're going to learn together and discuss. And Ed, good to see you too. Wonderful. So just want to recognize our many people that have worked hard this week. I think I'll do a little bit more introduction later. But there have been a lot of people working to get us ready for another great event here at the Fort Wallace Museum. Let's see, I want to encourage everybody. I hope you can stay through the afternoon and then stay for our Guardians Banquet tonight. The social hour begins at 5, and then we're going to have dinner at 6, and roasted bison and all the trimmings. And I'm looking forward to Smoky Hill Barbecue serving us this evening. Also, if you can join the Guardians at the front registration desk. At this point, we will have several points of contact for our organization today. There will be, you can do retail sales and other things at the front desk, as well as our Guardians table over here by the barracks. That's where you can buy the chances on our Henry Golden Boy for 2022 that's beautifully engraved. It has artwork by Peggy Fisher on the stock. It looks really nice. And then later this afternoon and evening, we will start selling raffle tickets. But go ahead and be taking a look at all of our beautiful items that are in the Weiser room and decide what you're going to shoot for. So I think that's it. Just know that what we do here is we promote scholarship, and then our banquet is in support of all these educational efforts. So the reason this is the reason why we have a banquet. You know, education, preserving, protecting, and telling other people, spreading the word about history is what we do. And then, so the banquet is just a fun time to help make that possible. So, what else, Deb?
Really, the reason we do this is to show that nerdy people can have fun too. So that's why we do it. I wanted to say a couple of things about the programming. I, as you all know, go all over the place speaking and talking about Fort Wallace and the events that we're doing here and history in general. And people are just blown away when they come and they see how small the community is. And, you know, the population is so small in Wallace County and every county in western Kansas. And they're like, how do you do these things? Well, obviously, if you look at the addresses in this room, our community is a lot bigger than Wallace and Wallace County and Logan County and Thomas County. It just goes beyond those borders. I was speaking on Kansas Territory the other day, and I'm like, you know, we used to stretch all the way to the Continental Divide. I said, so just take out all those lines. Take out all those lines. And our community is really a great big circle that encompasses hundreds of miles here. And everybody's a part of that story, and we appreciate their supporting our sharing it. So that's, yeah, and we keep drawing people into the community from far and wide.
Yeah, it's part of the fun of it. So, and I want to just commend Deb also as our coordinator for the symposium and bringing all this marvelous talent to Wallace, Kansas. And thank you very much, Deb. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Marla Matkin. She is has already been coined as a Dennis K. Clark Lecture Series speaker. She's our friend. She is a woman of many, many talents, and I love everything when she shares with us. It's fabulous, and so I'd like to present Marla Matkin. Put this over here.
Hello? Oh, yes, it's good to hear from you. It's been so long. Yes, they're all gathered here today. Such a nice crowd, good looking people. I'm sure they would like to hear from you. I'll introduce you, and you may take the floor. We have a special guest today that would like to speak to you, Mr. Alexander Graham Bell.
I am glad to know so many of you are gathered here today and have chosen the topic of communication to reflect upon. Considered one of the most valuable patents in history, I filed the patent for the telephone on February 14, 1876, just hours before my rival, Elisha Gray, filed his. The only difference between success and failure is the ability to take action. I understand your modern telephones are leaps and bounds ahead of my original invention, but believe it or not, I envisioned this day. You see, I wrote the following in a letter to my father in 1876. The day is coming when the man at the telephone will be able to see the distant person to whom he is speaking. The inventor looks upon the world and is not contented with things as they are. He wants to improve what he sees. So, my best advice to you, never underestimate the power of a dream. Goodbye and good luck.
Well, good morning and welcome, as Jane said, to the 222 Symposium here at Fort Wallace. And I'm pleased to welcome you to my program entitled 19th Century Communication, or as I sometimes refer to it, the fine art of 19th century communication, because it indeed is. And we're going to look at it today in large part through the eyes of the ladies, because as we well know, often they are overlooked, their participation and contributions, and we don't want to do that today. But by the same token, we're not going to leave out the gentlemen either. And we're also going to kind of look at the first half of the 19th century and the second half. The first half is pretty traditional type of communication. By the time we're getting into the second half of the 19th century, we're encountering technology. Now, a very famous gentleman, Sir Winston Churchill, once said, "There's nothing like oratory. It can make a commoner into a king, or for that matter, a queen, because his country has been ruled brilliantly with the longest running monarch. And she is a woman, obviously." And he also went on to say, in a more humorous vein, regarding speech, it should be long enough, it's like a woman's skirt, should be long enough to cover the subject, but short enough to create interest. And so we hope by the end of the afternoon, and you've heard the other speakers, that you do believe we covered the subject, created interest, and we didn't overstay our welcome. Now we're going to look at something we do every day, and that is conversation. Conversation is the exchange of thoughts, ideas, and to listen to one another. But the Victorians were very proper about this. They had rules for everything. You know, social status was very important to them. So just a few of these rules just for fun. Number one, be cool, calm, and collected using appropriate language. Now, I think we can all agree that makes common sense and that we hope we can do that. Number two, the object of conversation is to amuse and entertain, as well as exchange of thoughts and ideas. So I think we're all on track. Number three, now this is where I fall down. Do not always commence a conversation by alluding to the weather. You know, I always feel if you talk religion, politics, or people, you're going to offend somebody. But I'm a native Kansan. And I mean, you can complain about the weather all you want. Nobody's going to care. And if you wait 15 minutes, it's probably going to change anyway. Number four, Do not make a pretense of gentility. Now, I know a lot of you here today, and some of you are new faces, but I don't feel that any one of us is going to get it in our head to be too genteel today. We're going to be down home. We're Kansans. And last but not least, do not aspire to be a storyteller, unless, of course, you are one. You know, nothing's better than a good storyteller, and nothing's worse than a poor storyteller. And you'll be invited any number of parties if you can tell a story. But if you can't, you better stay home. And as Mark Twain once said, there's two types of speakers, the nervous and the liars. And again, as I referred to earlier, by the end of the day, you can decide how we did. And hopefully, we fall somewhere in between. Now we're going to move on quickly through some of these. Storytelling. Storytelling is a very old art form. It preserves traditions, culture, and beliefs. And it started out as an oral tradition, but would eventually evolve into the written form. By writing it down, you preserve the truth, character, and integrity of the story. Remember the old game we used to play as kids? We'd sit in a circle, and one of them would start a phrase or a comment. It'd go around the circle, and by the time it got to the end, it was nothing like it started. So that is why it is very important to write down these stories from the past, from today, because tomorrow will be, our stories will be in the past. Now, one of the very important commandments of storytelling in any form, written or oral, is make your audience care. I do a lot of first person, and I find that it's very important. You need to be passionate about your character. You need to sell it. And it doesn't matter how good your characters are, your setting, your storyline. If you haven't made your audience care, you're probably falling down on the job. Now, something the 19th century folks were very good at was speechifying. Boy, could they speechify all day long. It didn't matter if you were a politician or preacher. If you had a platform and a captive audience, you could go on minutes, hours, all day long. Now, the object of a speech is to inform, persuade, instruct, and entertain. Some of these people included this, but others just simply did not. And so speechifying reached its zenith in the 19th century, but some of the best speeches were short speeches. And I think the one that most exemplifies this is Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The gentleman before him spoke for 2.5 hours. He got up and spoke but a few minutes, and we remember every word he said, even today. Now, some of these women were starting to take the platform in the 19th century. And they were beginning to introduce, well, they were wanting to talk about items such as abolition, suffrage, temperance, women's rights. So they took to the platform. And one lady I would like to share with you today is Sojourner Truth. She was a slave. She had found her freedom. She was with the Underground Railroad, an abolitionist. She spoke to suffrage and women's rights. But she was uneducated. She was what you would say rough around the edges. But she gave a speech that some of you may or may not be familiar with called Ain't I a Woman? And it's in the same vein as Abraham Lincoln's. She made her audience care. She got her point across. And I would like to share that speech with you today. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a pretty soon fix. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that a woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arms. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What do they call it?
Intellect.
Yes, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in the black over there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Now let me ask you, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Thank you. Now we're going to come a little closer to home to a lady that has a definite connection here in Wallace County, and that is Maria de Geer. Maria de Geer was born in Ireland, came as an infant with her family to Canada. Her family were what you would say were socially conscious. She grew up at her father's knee, and this became part of her life. And she had a brother who she was very close to who died of alcoholism. So she took up the temperance movement. She became the first female speaker in Canada. She married and came to the United States, again talking temperance, suffrage, women's rights, equal rights. She wrote and talked about it. She found a way to Kansas. And one of the first things she did was found a town of Scott City. First woman and only woman to do so. But she also came to Wallace County and began a newspaper, the Western Times. And if this screen weren't here, you could see her office back here at the Western Times. She would eventually turn the editing and publishing over to her daughter. But she was a woman on the move. She made her mark, and particularly on Kansas. And I was fortunate enough to model for the statue of Maria de Geer that stands now in the corner of Scott City. And we dedicated that statue last summer. And I stood right next to her and spoke her words that I would like to share with you today. My daughters refer to me as the unladylike lady, for the causes I embrace are not those of a genteel lady, or for that matter, most ladies, whatever their station in life. You see, I was born a puny, frail, delicate child, and there were few expectations regarding my future. In fact, I was born so weak-footed, there was concern I might never walk. But once I got my feet firmly planted beneath me, I have been moving steadfastly and with determination ever since. And using my God-given skills, I have set out on a path propelled by vigor and energy to serve and initiate social change. I predicted, according to my convictions, which have proved true, that Kansas would be the chosen abode of God's people. It has been said time and tide wait for no man or woman. So while in Topeka, I read law in the office of Davis and Jetmore and became a practicing attorney. And I am proud to announce that in January of 1887, I became the first woman to be admitted to the Kansas State Bar Association. Let Kansas step forward and stand at last as a beacon of hope for women everywhere. With no regrets, I have charted my own course and will let history judge my accomplishments. And might I add, I have often found myself matching wits with tyrannical, unjust, and proud men. So I charge one and all present, but particularly the ladies, to be the master or mistress of your own destiny. At the end of your narrative, may it declare that your unladylike conduct spoke to the passions of your heart. Your destiny waits. Lead the way that others might follow you. Unladylike ladies. So the women are coming into their own, and they shouldn't be forgotten, although sometimes they are. Now, another very traditional form of communication, like I said, we're still in the first half of the 19th century, were books. Books were very important. Women were coming into their own. There were more female authors in the 19th century than any preceding century. Some people thought they were more popular and prevalent than some of the male authors, but I'm not sure others would agree with them. You had women such as Louisa May Alcott writing Little Women, as well as Harriet Beecher Stowe writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. Two women talking about the same subject, but in much different lights. They're going up against men such as Herman Melville and Moby Dick, considered one of the most popular books of the 19th century, written in a very traditional English style. But he was going up against Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, considered the first truly American novel, because Huck told his story in first person of the people and places along the Mississippi River in a very regional vernacular that had never been done before. So the writing and books of the 19th century are changing. Now, I know many of you today probably read your books on iPads and things of that nature, but I think there is nothing more calming and soothing on a rainy day or a cold winter's night to curl up in a chair with a blanket, a cup of tea or a glass of wine with your favorite book. It's an old friend. You meet people you'll never meet anywhere else. Go places you'll never go. Have adventures you'll never have. So I suggest to you all, we still may have some winter left. So find your favorite book, and the next time it snows, spend some time with that book. Now, we're going to look now at diaries and journals. They are very important. How many of you have had the opportunity to read a family member's diary from the past? Okay, we do have some few. They're essential, primary sources. You get to know these people as you did not know before on a daily basis. They're sharing with you their life story. And if you have a diary of a family member or you find a diary, if you don't want it, make sure you get it somewhere, such as a museum or a historical society, that will appreciate that diary. You know, psychologists said one of the most healthy things you can do is maintain a journal. And maybe somewhere down the road, someone will read your journal and be inspired and moved by the experience. Now, some of you may have been here last year when I did a program called Women on the Santa Fe Trail. And I shared a woman with you by the name of Susan Shelby McGoffin. Born to wealth and privilege, she was an unlikely person to travel the Santa Fe Trail. But in point of fact, this bride of 8 months would be the first white woman to travel this trade route. Much of the information we have regarding travel, life on and along the trail is supplied in her diary. She began it in June of 1846 as she departed Independence, Missouri. She would write in it almost every day, chronicling in great detail the appearances and customs of everything she saw and experienced. She traveled with her husband Samuel, her maid Jane, and her dog Ring. And she was often most comfortable setting up housekeeping in a tent with bed, mattress, table, chairs, carpeting. On the trail for 15 months, she would become proficient in Spanish, but more importantly, in trader lingo. So now, let us join Susan along the trail. Now my prairie life begins. And with my dear husband, Samuel, who I refer to as Meowma, I embrace this pioneering experience. My journal tells a story different than what has ever been done before. The curtain rises on a new scene, my personal trek from the city of New York to the plains of New Mexico. As I ride along, I can scarcely wrap my mind around it. Upon entering this prairie world, I observed migrating buffalo. We supped on soup made of the hump ribs, the choicest meat of the buffalo. I have never tasted its equal in the best hotels of New York and Philadelphia. Unfortunately, these animals are quite ugly, ill-shapen things with long, shaggy hair over their heads. But they are the supreme ruler of their prairie kingdom. I share with you now an entry from my diary. On July 4th, 1846, I took the opportunity to cut my name among the hundreds of others on Pawnee Rock. It is near this very location we suffered a horrendous carriage accident. What a mess of baskets, boxes, and bags. But we picked up and traveled on, though both my husband and I were battered and bruised, to say the very least. At last, we arrived at Ben's Fort. The buildings of the fort are constructed of adobe, with dirt floors which we must dampen with water several times a day, and ceilings made of logs. Upon entering the fort, we become part of a very interesting and diverse culture. It was during my stay here, though, that I suffered a miscarriage. And to think in a few short months I should have been a happy mother and made the heart of a father glad. At this same time, an Indian woman in the room directly below me gave birth to a healthy baby. Within minutes, she went down to the river and bathed herself and the child. A ritual of her people, I am told. But time and trail wait for no one. Our next destination, Las Vegas, New Mexico, where I am shocked to see children in a perfect state of nudity and scantily clad women wearing skirts showing their calves and low-cut blouses. All this aside, they are very quick and intelligent people. Again, from my diary, I read, we traveled in the wake of the Army under General Kearney. On August 31st, 1846, under the Star-Spangled Banner, I entered Santa Fe, the first American lady to enter under such circumstances, I was told. It was hard to realize that I was in my own house, where I was to receive callers and set up housekeeping. The military have been very punctual in calling, some nearly every day. One even arrived with an invitation to a Spanish ball given by the officers to the traders. I felt it impolite not to exhibit myself at the menagerie with the other bipeds of curiosity. I observed Doña Tulis, Principal Monte bank keeper of Santa Fe. Unable to see me in person, General Kearney sent his regards by the way of Meowma as we prepared to depart Santa Fe. If possible, I prefer to ride horseback. And if the opportunity presents itself, I happily tramp over the country and train over which we travel, whether high, low, despite the dangers. Again, from my diary. Wednesday, November 25th, 1846 is the most memorable day, as it is the anniversary of our wedding. 'Twill be fresh in the minds of those most concerned. I was relieved to have cause for celebration, as I had been ill with fever while at San Gabriel. After prostration of body, I was again creeping about. December 29th, 1846, finds the enemy, the Mexican army, on us as we hear today, and they have even had battle with our troops only about 80 miles from us. 'Twas quite a nice little skirmish. Later in January, rumors came that the population of New Mexico was rising up between us and Santa Fe. In point of truth, we were flying before them as we passed through the Jornado de Muerto. I deal with an ever-present fear for myself and mi alma. We take refuge in a boarding house, and the inmates there are seating kind. We have chocolate at breakfast, again about 10, with dinner at 2, chocolate again at 4, and with supper at 9. I shall have to make myself a cookbook to take home with me. The cooking here is entirely different from ours, but the dishes are quite fine. It would be a shame not to let my friends taste them too. We are given a nice diversion from the fear and tribulation. The wonder of wonders, the American lion himself is called on us today. Old rough and ready General Zachary Taylor. He is very talkative, agreeable, and quite polite, with apparent high regard for female character, as he should, since he fathers 4 daughters. He even wore his uniform, which I am told is no common custom with him. The world is full of trials and tribulations God puts us all through, but we dare not murmur even though they be hard. It is the life of a wandering princess, this one of mine, and I have accepted it as my lot. I have shared with you a brief but telling account of our 1,200-mile crossing, but do not be fooled by its brevity. For within the pages of my diary lies the mystery of mysteries, the Santa Fe Trail. Thank you. Now, I include photography in here, and you say, why is photography communication? You know the old phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we have men such as Matthew Brady, who is out on the battlefield in the Civil War, chronicling the experience. The pictures he took were some of the first ever seen in people's homes of what it was truly like, the devastation and destruction on the battlefield. Even to this day, his photojournalism is considered some of the best ever recorded. And you had artists such as Theodore Davis and Alfred Wood. They were capturing the experience before, during, and after battle. And the gruesome tales were there for all to see. So photography or art is very, very important. Now we're going to get into the latter half of the century and technology. The first technological innovation in the 19th century was Samuel Morse's telegraph. The first telegraph message was sent in 1844 between Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. By 1860, most every city east of the Rocky Mountains was outfitted with telegraph poles and stations. And by 1864, it had reached the West Coast. Now, nearly 150 years before text, tweets, and emails, President Abraham Lincoln became the first wired president. He had a keen interest in technology and spent more time in the War Department telegraph office than anywhere else outside the White House. 28-year-old Elizabeth Cogley sat at a small desk in a Pennsylvania Railroad ticket office in Lewiston Junction, Pennsylvania, on April 16, 1861, frantically writing down a message that was coming through the telegraph. This nicely dressed woman wore a serious expression. The message she was transcribing was vital and history-making. The day before, a similar wire had reached Elizabeth. She carefully noted its contents and passed it on to the highest-ranking military official in the area. It was from President Abraham Lincoln, and it read, "I appeal to all loyal citizens to favor, facilitate, and to aid in this effort to maintain the honor, integrity, and the existence of this national union and the perpetuity of popular government, and to redress those wrongs already long endured." This would be Lincoln's first call for troops. He asked for 75,000 volunteers. The following day, Pennsylvania's first war governor, Andrew B. Curtin, sent a telegram to Captain Selheimer of the 1st Defenders Division, telling him to rally his troops and report to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania as soon as possible. After delivering the message to the captain, Elizabeth was instructed to respond to Governor Curtin with the news that his men move at once. This railroad telegrapher transcribed this important information quickly and accurately. Little did Elizabeth know that this event would be remembered as the first telegraph exchange of the Civil War. Now, the average workday for a woman in a telegraph station was a 10-hour day. The job could be dangerous, too. The equipment was often poorly, if not grounded at all. And this is exemplified by 18-year-old Lizzie Clapp. For on July 11, 1876, she was sitting at her station watching a thunderstorm roll in. A thunderbolt hit the wires of the station coming in and hitting the gold necklace on her neck, and she fell to the floor dead. This would be a first call to take action and to better deal with these accidents and fatalities that might occur. Now, not only that, but they could contract tuberculosis, or what they commonly refer to as consumption. These stations were poorly ventilated, and they incubated disease such as tuberculosis consumption. Also, they were isolated, and they were drinking from tainted streams or creeks, and they would also come down with typhoid fever. So these women out here working in these telegraph stations had a lot to deal with, but probably none more than the hazard experience encountered by Abigail Strubble. The naysayers said that a woman could not adequately handle the job of telegraph operator, but I proved them wrong. I was more than capable of tackling the dangers that occasionally arose. After all, it was part of the job. One bitterly cold night, I received a message that a locomotive pulling a single car had thundered out of Pittsburgh, headed for Washington, D.C., and an emergency conference called for by President Abraham Lincoln. At the same time, a westbound freight train pulled into the station 15 miles west of Port Perry, where I was located. The conductor of this westbound train entered the telegraph office and asked for track clearance to Pittsburgh. The message was relayed to the track dispatcher, and the all clear was given. All was as it should be until the freight train left the station. As it moved along, it picked up steam. A frantic message came through from the dispatcher who had issued the all clear. Stop the freight. A special train bound for Washington is heading directly for it. I was the telegraph operator on duty. I responded immediately. Peering out the window, it was evident I had only seconds to act. There were no signals at this time to flash a warning. I raced out into the freezing night. Just as the oncoming train was passing, I lurched forward and grabbed the handhold of a freight car. Hanging on, dangling about, I jerked about. The frosted rungs and the frozen iron running bars along the train ripped the wool from my mittens as I crawled toward the locomotive and the unsuspecting crew. Reaching the coal car, I was knocked back by a blow to the leg from the knotted end of a rope hanging from a tunnel entrance. Struggling, I managed to get to my feet again and attract the attention of the crewman shoveling coal into the furnace. When he became aware of what was happening, he brought the train to a stop and threw it into reverse. The freight car crew was eternally grateful to me for such heroic actions. But might I add that for many of us, the advantages of being a telegraph operator far exceeded the disadvantages to be found with the job. So you can see these women are coming in to their own now as they're working women. And Abigail Strubble was but one. Then we find our old friend that you were introduced to earlier, Alexander Graham Bell. He exhibited the first working telephone in 1876 at the Philadelphia World's Fair. But it would be several years before there would be a working system or exchange to be had. And when it did come about, it was often in small towns and counties, and it was what we know as the party line. How many of you fondly remember the party line? And so that was always quite an experience for everyone. But Alexander would also be a co-founder of AT&T. Unfortunately, he sold out before the company really did well. He was not a businessman, he was an inventor. But AT&T would then circulate telephone throughout the country and around the world. But I would like to introduce you to somebody very special. Let me introduce myself. I'm Emma Nutt. Well, actually, I'm Emma M. Nutt, but you can call me Emma. And yes, I know what you're thinking. I, too, am glad I was not named Ima. But more importantly, my name made history. For on September 1st, 1878, my life changed when I became the first female telephone operator in the world. And you heard me right, in the world. Hired by the Boston Telephone Dispatch Company. I was under the employ of Alexander Graham Bell himself. You see, he could no longer put up with the rude and rebellious attitudes of the teenage boys he had originally hired to man the switchboards. Callers soon came to love me for my patience and soothing voice. But it wasn't as easy as you might think. Not just any woman can make the grade. You had to pass height, weight, and arm length test to fit into the cramped quarters allotted to a telegraph operator. And if you're considering applying, dark clothing is also preferred as well. But regardless, I never once considered leaving the employ of the telephone company, even though I had to sit in uncomfortable straight-back chairs for long hours. I worked alongside teenage boys 54 hours a week for well over 30 years. All this I did for the princely sum of $10 a month until around 1900 when it was increased to $7 a week. The boys always made more than the ladies. I certainly hope you value the ladies and show them more respect today. And despite the doubting Thomases, I claim to know all the telephone numbers in the New England telephone directory. And all these many years later, some of those numbers still ring a bell. Pardon the bad pun. But how many telephone numbers do you remember? Enough said. I now have reported to you the travails and triumphs of a telephone operator. But I leave you with this final request that I hope you all remember fondly. Number, please. And how many of you remember when you call the operator, all at once, on the count of three, let's all say our telephone number. 1, 2, 3. 149. Okay? When you still had the kindly operator. Now we're going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous. I was asked to put this program together last summer for Fort Laramie National Historic Site. And of all things, two of the male rangers specifically asked me to include the language of the fan. And this was something very Victorian. You did at a dance or a party. You had a list of do's and don'ts. And I'm going to quickly share that with you. And then I actually have fans for the ladies. And I'm going to give you a copy of the do's and don'ts. I personally don't partake in the language of the fan for one special reason. I talk with my hands. And my government and history teacher told me in high school if they tied my hands behind my back, I wouldn't be able to talk. That's after he appointed me the national and official geographical locator of the class. But anyway, I don't partake because I'm afraid with all my gyrations, I'm going to make commitments I can't keep with the language of the fan. So let's quickly look over those. And as I said, I'll give each of the ladies a fan. Another interesting thing that happened when I was at Fort Laramie, when one of my programs was over, a very attractive young lady and her daughter came up. She was nicely dressed. She and her husband and son were there as well, but they were wandering elsewhere. And she spoke very good English. And she wanted to tell me how much she enjoyed the program and the fan. She said she had inherited from her grandmother a collection of European fans from the 18th, 19th century, and she was proudly going to put this little fan from Amazon with these priceless other fans. So it's always a great deal of fun when you do something like this. But let's quickly go over the language of the fan. Carrying in the right hand in front of the face means follow me. Carrying in the left hand in front of the face, I'm desirous of your acquaintance. Carrying in the right hand open, you are too willing. Carrying in the left hand open, come and talk to me. Drawing through the hand, I hate you. Drawing across the cheek, I love you. Drawing across the eyes, I am sorry. Twirling in the left hand, we are watched. Twirling in the right hand, I love another. Presented shut, do you love me? Open and shut, you are cruel. Open wide, wait for me. Letting it rest on the right cheek, yes. Letting it rest on the left cheek, no. Fanning slowly, I am married. Fanning quickly, I am engaged. With handle to lips, kiss me. So I think you can see where a lot of confusion could arise. And you're on the safe side. But I want you ladies to have fun with this. And during the course of the day, when you have a little bit of time, you're going to have a fan, and you're going to have the rules. And I want you to practice, and then maybe by this evening...
We'll all be married or divorced.
Yes.
I think the guys need a list of what they're trying
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and you really did. And like I said, we could do that too. But if we run out, we can run off more. But like I said, we went from the sublime to the ridiculous. Now we're going back to the sublime. I'm ending my program with the most important communication of all. And that is a daily talk with your Heavenly Father. By doing so, you're not necessarily doing Him a favor, but you're blessed and fortified for the rest of your day. And because we're near St. Patrick's Day and we're commemorating Captain Miles Keogh, our favorite Irishman, I leave you with the Irish blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall softly upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand. Thank you.
Marla, wonderful job as always. Thank you so much for sharing all that, the communication in the 19th century. And yes, that looks like a dangerous weapon to me. So I would like to also give a little plug for that. Marla is also an author, and she wrote the children's book called Custer's Mouse, and we are pleased to say that her second book is just about to be published, and it's made possible through the Kansas Creative Arts Commission as well as Dane Hansen, and it will be, can I go ahead and talk about it, Marla? Okay, it's called A Dragon's Tale, and this little children's book is going to be the story of a little boy who lives at the fort, and he meets Dr. Turner and gets to explore a real live dragon out here in western Kansas. Hey, you know what? What better way? All I have to do is this, and I just illustrate everything. So look for that book to be coming out. What do you think, Marlon? Published in another 6 weeks?
Well, yes, hopefully. It's at the layout right
Okay,
now.
it's at the
And
layout.
it will have to be proofed.
Beautiful illustrations, and Marla's done a wonderful job. Bubba plays Elliot, the little boy. And so anyway, it's going to be another really nice asset of outreach to young people, to children, and another way to communicate history. So anything else for right now? We ready for a break? Let's say 10 minutes, please. Let's have a short break, and then we'll be enjoying Chris Gable coming up next.